Well-behaved women seldom make history. This quote has been credited to probably every historical woman to ever exist. Marilyn Monroe, Beyonce, Mae West, Eleanor Roosevelt, Boudica. This phrase has reached a level in pop culture that we associate it with women who went against the grain and whose lives and works are now celebrated, becoming the cultural touchstone for inspirational Etsy pins across the land. It was actually originally stated by Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, historian, academic, and Pulitzer Prize winner. The idea behind it being that pious and subservient women that behave appropriately for their time will have any and all of their contributions disregarded. But further than that, Labour designated women's work is unappreciated no matter how vital it is. To women who just get their heads down, crack on with the job, and are not noticed regardless of how extraordinary. Simply put, women can do the most important work, but because it's women doing it, it's just not valued. And since it's International Women's Day, I want to share a story a bit like that from my own family history. Keep in mind this is all hearsay, things I've heard through the grapevine, and are open to being corrected at some future awkward family dinner. You never know what dark secrets are hiding in your family lore. So, picture it. Yorkshire, 19-something, early 20th century. My teenage great-grandmother, my dad's mum's mum, was not having a good time of it. She'd lost her own mum, and her dad unfortunately just couldn't look after her, and that had her ending up in the workhouse, which, as you can imagine, was not the nicest place to be. Thing is, the concept of the workhouse started off as a form of charity, primarily by churches, as a way to help people back up when they've fallen down. Offering them food and shelter, finding them work, doing arts and crafts, all that sort of care in the community stuff. I don't know how controversial this is going to sound, but on paper, the idea behind the workhouse is not terrible. You hear people complaining about the unhoused. Well, I'll tell you something. Put a ceiling over their heads, bing bang bosh, not homeless anymore. That was the basic concept of the workhouse to begin with. But you can probably already see the gigantic gaping loophole in the centre of this. Free labour. Surely no one would take advantage of that. Well, somewhere at the early 1800s, even the workhouse was getting industrialised. Yep, no more of that friendly Friar Tuck aesthetic. Pack 'em in, 6 to a room, get 'em working, and if they refuse, it's back on the streets with them. So basically it was a poor person prison. It was a prison for being poor. But you might think, it's the 1900s, the end of the Victorian age. That sort of thing was surely on its way out. No, workhouses weren't abolished until the 1940s. Jesus Christ! And not just that, the late 40s, 48. And now great-grandma was trapped in that declining, cruel system. But fear not, there is a hero in this story. Her auntie. And once she got wind of her niece being sent to the workhouse, and this is how it was described to me, she went down there, all 5'0" of her, kicked down the doors, and let them know in no uncertain terms her niece would be coming home with her. And this story always stuck with me. It wasn't some great power to the people moment. This woman wasn't advocating for social change. There were other people still having to stay in the workhouse. She was just doing what was right, which is impressive. I wanted to share this story because right now we can all see terrible and overwhelming things happening. I sometimes think, what can my tiny little voice do? I can't add anything of worth here. I'll let the much smarter and much more important people handle it. But then that just leads into falling into that thought-terminating trap of the great man narrative. You know, that history only lands on the shoulders of one singular person. The sort of stories like my great-grandmother's and her aunt's are only remembered through oral history, which means not all the details will be remembered properly. My family has been generationally working class and from the north of England. Looking back into our history, I'm not likely to find some famous suffragette hero. That doesn't mean that they don't matter. History didn't happen to a handful of people. We should remember that it's communities that create history's events. If something's right on your doorstep or right at your fingertips, do as Auntie do, and do your best. These small actions can still have an effect, even if they don't end up in the history books. I will always think of these women when I feel so small that I couldn't do anything. These are the women who lived in the margins, contributing, creating, challenging, being pillars of communities, whose names and words and deeds become scoured from the record. And just as important as any of the women that Ulrich just quotes is miscredited to.